Stop the clock. The shout came from below the tower, sharp enough to slice through the morning stillness. Elias didn't move. His trembling hand stayed inside the brass casing, adjusting the same gear he had adjusted every dawn for 20 years. The voice belonged to the mayor, the same man who had once called his son's death a tragic accident. Elias turned the small screwdriver slowly, feeling the soft click as the gear locked into place. The clock ticked once, twice, steady as a heartbeat that refused to die. He whispered under his breath, "It's not the clock that's broken." His words vanished under the next chime. Down below, townspeople began to gather for the tower's early inspection. The air smelled of wet stone and fresh paint, preparations for the centennial celebration only 2 months away. Elias descended the narrow stairs, his knees aching, his breath short. Each step echoed like a memory. At the base, the mayor was waiting with his practiced smile. "You're early again, Mr. Brandt," he said. "The tower's in perfect shape. You don't have to work yourself to death." Elias looked past him to the plaque by the door. It still read, "Dedicated to Progress, 1998. His son's name wasn't there. It never had been. "Clock doesn't stop just because someone says it's fine," Elias murmured, brushing his hands clean. The mayor chuckled. "Nor do you, it seems." But Elias's eyes were fixed on the tower's base where the first crack had formed long ago, the same crack where they said his boy slipped. No one had ever asked why the safety rail was missing that morning. No one wanted to. That night, Elias sat alone at his workbench, surrounded by clocks of all kinds, wall clocks, wristwatches, pocket pieces, all ticking out of sync, as if each carried a different memory of time. His hands moved automatically, polishing a small brass plate engraved with initials, L.B. Liam Brandt. He placed it back in the wooden drawer, hidden beneath a pile of old invoices. On the shelf above, the framed photo of his son smiled at nothing. A local radio hum played faintly in the background, an interview about the upcoming tower celebration. "We owe it all to the original builders," the host said cheerfully. Elias's hand stilled. "Do you?" he whispered. He turned off the radio. In the silence, he could almost hear the sound of Liam's laugh from 27 years ago, echoing inside the empty workshop. It was the same sound that used to fill these walls when they built toy clocks together. Elias stood, walked to the window, and looked at the tower rising over the town like a monument to deceit. A group of children passed by, pointing at the clock's glowing face. "Grandpa says that clock will outlive us all," one boy said. Elias smiled faintly. "Not if it remembers too much," he said to himself. The next morning, he visited the town archive, a dusty room filled with forgotten blueprints and faded records. The clerk barely looked up when Elias asked for the tower's original plans. "Should be under Brandt construction," the man said. Elias opened the old binder carefully. His son's handwriting marked small notes on every page. "Check load bolts. Secure outer beam." The final page was torn. He ran his finger along the edge where something had been ripped away. The clerk frowned. "That's odd. All the original approvals were signed off by the inspection committee. You see, Mayor Dalton's father—" "Yes," Elias cut in. "I remember." He left without another word. Outside, the wind carried the sharp scent of rain and rust. That night, Elias took out the torn blueprint he had copied years ago from memory. It wasn't perfect, but he remembered where every bolt had been, every safety line, every flaw. He traced the section where his son fell. There, the missing reinforcement bar. He'd argued for it. They'd removed it to save costs. They'd called it unnecessary. Elias pressed his hand against the paper until it wrinkled beneath his fingers. The next morning, he arrived at the tower before sunrise. Climbing the stairs again, he paused halfway up. The bell's weight creaked above him. He pulled out a small brass key, the one only he possessed, and unlocked the inner gear chamber. Inside, the massive pendulum swayed gently like a heartbeat in steel. He touched the cold metal, whispering, "You remember too, don't you?" His tools clinked softly as he worked. It wasn't repair this time. It was redesign. For every gear he adjusted, he wrote a hidden mark, a date, a name, a line of truth carved in symbols only he could read. When the bell struck 6, it rang slightly different, a deeper echo resonating like a buried memory calling through stone. By noon, the mayor returned. Elias, people say the clock sounds strange this morning. You didn't alter anything, did you? Elias smiled faintly. It's getting older, like us. The mayor laughed uneasily and left. Elias watched him walk away, his reflection warping in the tower's brass casing. That evening, the tower lights came on, bathing the town square in gold. Children played, vendors sold trinkets, and the same men who once lied toasted in the nearby cafe, their laughter spilling into the street. Elias stood in the shadows, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the tower's glowing face. The second hand swept smoothly, unstoppable, inevitable. It's almost time, he whispered. For the first time in years, he didn't feel weak. He felt steady, certain. When he reached home, he sat at his workbench again and pulled open the drawer. Beneath the brass plate lay an envelope he hadn't touched in decades. The coroner's report. Cause of death, fall from height. Contributing factor, negligence not proven. He placed it beside his son's photograph. They buried you in silence, he said softly, but I'll make the bells speak for you. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the hills, but Elias didn't look up. His fingers kept moving, sketching a new schematic for the tower's chime system. It wasn't vengeance he sought. It was confession, carved in time impossible to erase. As the last stroke of his pencil ended, the house went quiet except for a single clock ticking on the wall. He looked at it, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Every second remembers. Why did you erase his name?" Elias's voice trembled, not with age but with the weight of years unsaid. The question came out of nowhere, catching the mayor off guard. They stood in the cold interior of the clock tower, sunlight cutting across the dust like fractured glass. The mayor blinked, confused, adjusting his tie. "What name?" Elias didn't answer. He only pointed at the bronze plaque fixed at the tower's base, the one the whole town admired every day. The same plaque that listed every builder, every donor, every man who took credit for work they never touched. "My son's name should be here," Elias whispered. The mayor's practiced smile faltered. "Elias, I told you, the record was incomplete when you buried the truth," Elias interrupted, his voice rising. The sound echoed off the stone, sharp and accusing. "You took his life, then you took his name. I built this clock with him. He died under your watch." The mayor's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Silence spread like fog. Finally, he turned and left, muttering something about the old man losing his mind. Elias stood alone, the ticking of the tower swallowing every heartbeat until it sounded like grief itself. That night, he returned to his workshop, a fire he hadn't felt in decades. The table was crowded with metal scraps, gears, and the old blueprints he'd borrowed from the archive earlier that day. He spread them open carefully, flattening the creases with trembling hands. His son's handwriting filled the margins, neat, earnest notes written in pencil. Check support beams, secure pulley bolts. Elias traced the letters with his finger, feeling the ghost of his boy in every mark. Then his eyes caught the red ink of the final signature, not Liam's, but someone else's, a forged one. The inspection signature belonged to Dalton Sr., the former mayor, a man who never once climbed the scaffolding, but declared the tower safe to build. Elias's throat tightened as he turned the page. He found the missing section, the structural correction Liam had insisted upon, the extra support bar, the one Dalton's men had ordered removed to cut cost and finish faster before the election ceremony. Elias read the scribbled note at the bottom. "Don't argue. Finish it. We'll call it safe." His hands shook so violently he nearly tore the paper. "You killed him," he whispered, voice breaking. "You called his death an accident, but it was your greed." He stood and stumbled to the drawer, where he kept Liam's old toolbox. The scent of machine oil and brass filled the room. Inside lay the boy's last project, a half-assembled pocket watch with his initials etched on the back. Elias turned it over in his palm, hearing the faint rattle of an unfinished spring. The same sound his heart had made for 27 years. Something wound too tight, never released. He sat down and began to sketch. Not repairs this time. A plan. The gears of his mind turned with quiet, deliberate motion. The tower's mechanism wasn't just a clock. It was a voice of the town. Every chime reached every home. If the tower spoke again, it would speak truth. He studied the gear layout and realized how to rewire the resonance system. Each bell's tone was controlled by a rotating cam sequence. If he replaced certain cams, altered their angles, and set the pattern to Morse, the chime itself could spell out words, hidden, rhythmic confessions. He smiled faintly through tears. "You'll tell them, Liam. You'll finally tell them." The following day, he walked into the old foundry on the edge of town, the same place where his son had once cast small parts for their clocks. The worker at the counter recognized him instantly. "Mr. Brandt? Haven't seen you in ages." Elias nodded, his voice calm but his eyes distant. "Need to commission some pieces. Custom gears, specific cuts." He handed over a drawing, small enough to seem harmless. The worker whistled low. "Fine work. You still got the touch." Elias smiled politely, sliding a folded envelope across the counter. "Make them exactly as drawn. Not a hair different." That night, he sat in the darkness of his home, listening to the ticking chorus of clocks. Each tick carried a word he hadn't spoken in years. Guilt, rage, memory, justice. He took out the torn inspection report again and stared at the neat signature of Dalton Sr. The man had died with honors, a state funeral even, but his son, the current mayor, was still alive, still reaping what his father had built on silence. Elias's mind replayed the day of the fall. He remembered the sound, the sharp crack of metal, the scream cut short, the echo that followed like a bell struck from heaven. He'd run up the scaffolding, hands bleeding on the splinters, until he saw his boy lying on the ground. Liam's face had been still, dust in his hair, eyes open to the sky that never answered. They told him later that the safety bolts had failed. He believed them once. Not anymore. The next morning, Elias returned to the tower with his new pieces wrapped in cloth. He climbed the narrow spiral stairs while the town below stirred awake. A teenager shouted, "Morning, Mr. Brandt." He waved faintly but didn't look down. Inside the gear chamber, he worked with the patience of a surgeon. Each motion precise, each screw deliberate. He replaced the cams, fitted the gears, adjusted the pendulum's regulator. His fingers moved as if guided by memory, by the ghost of the boy who once stood beside him. At exactly noon, he tightened the last bolt. When the clock struck, its tone changed, subtle, haunting. A woman in the square looked up, frowning. "Does it sound different to you?" her friend asked. Elias smiled from above. The sound wasn't wrong. It was remembering. That evening, he returned home exhausted but calm. He placed the forge inspection page beside Liam's unfinished pocket watch and whispered, "They forgot the blueprint had another author." He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the old clock ticking in front of him. Each second felt heavier, more alive, like it was building toward something. The next chime would come soon, and this time, the gears wouldn't just move metal, they'd move truth. The house fell silent, except for that steady, measured ticking. Then, softly, Elias said, "The gears remember everything." "You hear that?" Elias whispered, his fingers trembling as the first bell struck midnight. The sound was deeper now, almost human, a low metallic moan that rolled through the quiet town like a buried voice clawing its way back to air. He stood high in the clock tower, face lit by the faint orange glow of his lantern, eyes wet but steady. Below him, the gears turned exactly as he designed, each rotation releasing one line of truth disguised as rhythm. He closed his eyes and listened, mouthing the words the bells were spelling in Morse. He didn't fall. He was pushed. For a second, his knees weakened. Then he steadied himself against the wall and let the sound wash through him. The tower was alive again, not just ticking but remembering. Down below, a lone night watchman frowned up at the tower, muttering, "Strange tone tonight." Elias smiled faintly. "It's the sound of guilt finding its echo," he whispered. The next morning, the town woke uneasy. Shopkeepers paused, listening as the clock struck 6. The chime felt wrong, slower, uneven, like it was hesitating between seconds. Old man Brandt's losing his touch. Someone joked outside the bakery. Elias, hearing from across the street, only nodded politely. Maybe the clock's just tired of lies. That evening, he returned to the tower with a small toolbox and a folded sheet of paper, the same page torn from the blueprint years ago. At the top was his son's name, Elias Brandt, faded but legible. Elias pressed the page against the brass casing of the pendulum chamber and held it there, whispering, "You'll be heard this time." Then he taped it in place, sealed beneath the glass window where sunlight would hit it each dawn. He pulled out a chisel and began carving symbols into the wood beside it. The initials of every man who signed the inspection report. Dalton, Grayson, Hill. 3 names, 3 lies. The next series of chimes would spell them all. The mechanism had no language of its own. He gave it one. By midnight, his shirt was soaked in sweat. His old hands ached. His breath came sharp. But he didn't stop. Every click, every rotation felt sacred. When the clock struck 12 again, the pattern emerged clearly. Short, long, long, short. A message. He wrote the translation in the dust. They lied. He died. His chest tightened, but his face remained calm. He'd given his grief a voice, and it would not fall silent again. The following day, the mayor called. "Elias, we need to talk." His voice carried forced cheer. "People say the bells sound strange. You might be overdoing maintenance." Elias's tone was mild. Maybe the tower's remembering too much. The mayor laughed nervously. "Just check it, all right? We can't have nonsense on the day of the centennial." Elias promised nothing and hung up. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed in the tower's heart, beside the swinging pendulum, the steady pulse that had measured his pain for almost 30 years. He opened his lunch tin, ate a small piece of bread, and stared at the gears moving like lungs breathing through steel. He spoke softly, as if his son were near. "I used to think time healed everything, but all it does is record. It keeps turning until someone listens." His voice broke, but he didn't stop talking. "They'll listen now, every hour, every bell." Then he adjusted the main regulator and set the sequence for dawn. The pattern would be unmistakable this time, long enough to draw attention, deliberate enough to be recognized. As he worked, lightning flashed across the horizon, throwing his shadow over the walls. The storm outside built like memory, returning too fast to hold. The next morning, when the clock struck 6, its chimes spread across the valley in 12 long tolls, uneven and haunting. Each note carried a fragment of a message, a name spelled into sound. The whole town froze. The baker stopped kneading dough. The butcher's knife paused mid-slice, and schoolchildren stared up from the courtyard. The bell was not ringing time anymore. It was telling a story. "Dalton," whispered one old woman, recognizing the rhythm as if memory itself had spoken. "It's saying Dalton." The mayor's phone began ringing nonstop. "Turn it off," he shouted from his office window. "Get Brandt up there. Now!" But Elias was already there, watching to the tower's narrow slit as people pointed, confused and afraid. He didn't move when the mayor's men arrived at the base. They shouted his name, pounding on the locked door, but he only turned one final screw and whispered, "Every lie needs a witness." Then he pressed a hidden lever behind the gear assembly. The clock's face lit faintly, powered by the stored voltage he'd rewired into the tower's frame. As the next chime began, sparks flickered across the metal edges, just enough to project faint light across the interior walls. The reflection formed words against the stone. Elias Brandt, age 17, crushed beneath greed. The guards outside saw light spill through the tower windows and gasped. "What's happening in there?" one shouted. The mayor stared up, face pale, realizing the tower was revealing something he'd spent years covering. Elias stood back, breathing hard, watching his son's name glow faintly across the gears before fading. "You're free now," he whispered. Rain began to fall, tapping softly on the roof. The men outside forced the door open, footsteps echoing up the stairs. Elias waited for them halfway, calm, soaked, eyes brighter than they'd ever seen. The mayor puffed up the final steps, shouting, "What have you done?" Elias simply smiled. I told the truth. You'll destroy the tower, the mayor yelled. No, Elias said softly. I'm rebuilding it. He turned and looked at the massive pendulum still swinging, steady and perfect. For once, it's on time. The mayor froze, watching as the gears turned again, slower now, deliberate. The bell struck once more, its deepest tone yet. Elias stepped closer to the window, rain streaking down the glass. He didn't look back when the mayor barked orders. He didn't need to. The tower was speaking now, and every sound it made was a confession written in air. As the final chime echoed across the valley, Elias rested his hand on the metal casing and closed his eyes. You were right, Liam, he whispered to the hum of gears. The tower remembers. And with that, the rain grew heavier, washing the dust from the plaque outside. Beneath years of grime, one faint engraving reappeared. L. Brandt, apprentice builder. Elias smiled through tears, whispering, Time's finally listening. Make it stop! The mayor's wife screamed as the 12th bell tolled, louder and darker than any sound the town had ever heard. The plaza below the clock tower rippled with confusion. Faces turned upward, conversations froze, and laughter bled into silence. But Elias didn't move from his perch inside the tower. His hand rested on the lever, eyes fixed on the pendulum's hypnotic sway. The sound was working exactly as he planned. Every chime was a message, every echo a confession. He whispered, You buried him here, now let the world hear him. Down below, the mayor stumbled onto the stage meant for the centennial speech, shouting into the microphone, Don't panic. It's a mechanical fault. But even his voice shook. The townspeople didn't believe him. They could feel that something in the sound was deliberate, alive, accusing. The chime pattern pulsed in rhythmic Morse. He lied. He signed. He killed. People looked at each other, unsettled, searching for meaning in the vibration of the bells. The old war veteran near the fountain muttered, That's no fault. That's language. The mayor's smile cracked. Turn it off, he yelled at his aide. Cut the power. But there was none to cut. Elias had rewired the clock circuits days ago. The tower ran now on its own stored current, its own pulse. Inside the chamber, Elias stood in the trembling light of the lantern, watching the brass reflect the storm-gray sky. Every tick of the gears sounded heavier than thunder. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of falling, not of being found. It's his time now, he whispered to the ghost of his son. The stairwell door burst open, boots clattering against iron. 2 officers stormed in, out of breath. Mr. Brandt. Step away from the mechanism, one shouted. Elias didn't turn. You're too late, he said calmly. The clock's already telling the truth. The officers hesitated. This is sabotage. Elias smiled faintly. No, it's remembrance. They exchanged looks, unsure whether to arrest him or just listen. The next bell struck, vibrating to the tower like a living heartbeat. The mayor, red-faced, tried to continue his speech over the noise, but his words vanished under the 4th tone, deeper, slower, heavier, followed by a brief silence that fell holy. Then came the next message, clear as rhythm itself. L. Brandt, age 17. Fall was no accident. The crowd gasped collectively, sound rolling through like a wave of awakening. An old woman clasped her chest. He's telling us something, she whispered. The mayor's voice cracked. It's lies. That old fool's gone mad. But no one looked at him anymore. Every eye was on the clock tower. Elias watched from above, tears streaking through dust. They're hearing you, Liam, he said softly. His hand brushed the engraved plate he'd placed earlier over the mechanism, the one bearing his son's name. The tower lights flickered as rain began to fall, each drop catching the glow from the lanterns below, turning the square into a shimmering mirror. Power's surging, shouted one officer behind him. If you don't stop this, it'll blow. Elias turned at last, meeting their frightened eyes. Good, he said. Then they'll remember the sound forever. He reached for the main regulator and slowed the pendulum. The ticking deepened, echoing like a slow heartbeat of guilt. The bells responded, and the final message began to play. One long, haunting sequence that spelled out Mayor Dalton covered it up. The crowd erupted, shouts mixed with disbelief, with old memories resurfacing. A man in the front row whispered. My brother worked at site. He said safety lines were missing. Another woman cried. He told me the rails were new. He lied. The mayor stumbled backward, microphone clattering, his voice drowned by the roar of truth. He's framing me, he yelled, but his face already told the world otherwise. Reporters in the crowd lifted cameras. Flashes burst like lightning. History, long buried under stone and silence, was speaking at last. Inside the tower, Elias felt the vibration rise into the floor, shaking bolts loose, threatening collapse. The officers grabbed him by the arm. You'll die if this thing falls, one shouted. Elias only smiled. I already did. The day he did. He pulled free, turning one last gear to lock the sequence in permanent rotation. Even if they shut the tower down, the Bell memory would replay again at every dawn, forever. It'll never stop now, he said quietly. The officer looked at him, bewildered. Why? Elias met his eyes. Because time doesn't forgive. It only waits. A deafening crack tore through the air. Lightning struck the weather vane at the tower's peak. The impact rattled everything. Dust fell like ash. The crowd screamed as sparks showered down. The tower groaned, a wounded giant. Elias held the railing, steady despite the chaos. Liam, he whispered, you can rest now. The chimes hit their final pattern. 12 tones, slow and solemn, like a funeral march echoing through generations. Below, as smoke drifted from the top of the tower, people knelt in the rain, whispering the boy's name. The mayor, pale and trembling, dropped to his knees as his father's crime resurfaced before the whole town. In that moment, the power cut out. Silence fell. Then, faintly, from the clock's depths, one last tick sounded, a heartbeat refusing to die. The officers turned toward Elias, but he was gone from their sight line, hidden in the shadows near the pendulum. Where is he? One yelled. Then came the softest sound, the click of a pocket watch closing. The light from the window caught it for a second, gleaming in his hand. Elias looked out through the rain toward the town square below. The faces were small, trembling, alive. He's finally free, he murmured. The officer stepped closer, hesitant, and saw the old man smile through tears. His lips moved one last time. You can't silence truth once it learns to ring. The final bell echoed across the valley, long and low, fading into the night like a promise kept. When the sound died, all that remained was rain and the steady tick of the tower. A town's conscience awakened. And as dawn began to break over the ruins of the celebration, the mayor's voice cracked from below, broken and hollow. Turn it off. But no one moved. The people only looked up, listening, as if time itself had begun to speak their guilt. And in that unbroken silence, the town finally understood what Elias had built. Not a clock, but a witness. Make sure to like this channel, subscribe, and enjoy the videos.